Hello and welcome to The Process. I'm going to be your host today, Chloe Vincente. I'm an anchor and an investigative reporter with WDBJ7, and today we're breaking down the process of Silent No More.
It's like psychological kidnapping. A local mom forced to entertain.
They told me that if I was to say or do anything, they would kill both of my daughters.
Trafficked for sex and drugs, yet no one close knew.
Human trafficking is happening here. It's neighbors, parents trafficking their children, and it's going undetected.
Silent No More.
Joining me now is Melissa Gaona, the
Hi, guys.
editor, producer, journalist. She did everything, one-man
Videographer.
band
No,
of
just kidding.
Silent No More. We were having a conversation the other day in the green room, and this is why we wanted to do this podcast, because Melissa put her heart and soul into the documentary, and I asked her, why did you do it? Why did you put months of time went into this?
Yes. Well, first of all, Chloe, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here and talk to you guys about the process of how this documentary went down. And okay, so your question is, what made me want to start this?
Yeah.
That's a long answer, but to sum it up quickly, I have been working as a journalist here at WDBJ7 for, I believe, 12 years. And about 2.5 years ago, I started noticing an uptick in like local human trafficking cases. So it was no surprise to have a human trafficking story that we would talk about on the news, you know, in big cities like Dallas or Norfolk or even Henrico County area, DC. And I just noticed an uptick in human trafficking cases that we started to report on local news that were happening on a local level. And that just stirred something inside of me with the issue of human trafficking and how it happens. So long story short, a job position opened up for Virginia's only safe home, which just so happens to be right here in our backyard in the Roanoke Valley. So I applied for the position and I took a part-time position as their outreach team and communications coordinator. So a big part of that job is getting trained on human trafficking and learning about how it happens and learning about local cases and learning about the ins and outs of this issue. But also we work with survivors inside the safe home, local survivors. And as this work began to really take off, you know, I work for the lampstand in the morning and then I come to Channel 7 and I'm a news anchor and journalist in the evening, afternoon. And I knew quickly, like, to just be honest, I felt stirred to do a documentary 2 years ago.
Wow.
For human trafficking. And it was like, you know, we have this platform with television. We have this platform where we have thousands of people who tune in and watch every day. And we're giving them all this content, but like, are we changing lives with the content? And that really, I think, is where the idea came from, that a human trafficking doc needed to be done.
And I want to rewind just a little bit. Obviously, if you haven't seen her documentary, go watch it. It's online. But for those people that haven't gotten the chance to watch it yet, can you just give a quick summary of what you did?
Silent No More is a 30-minute documentary that really gives an in-depth look of human trafficking on a local level, many times due to, media and movies and things of that nature. Human trafficking is over-sexualized and over-dramatized. And what that does is it really cripples victim advocate groups who are trying to tackle this issue, because all along we've been looking for the wrong thing. It's given us stereotypes. So we think it looks one way, but it really looks another. So this documentary is going to go into local cases. It's going to really show you the myths versus the facts. We're going to talk about red flags, and we're also going to show you how human trafficking happens, how simple human trafficking happens, and also I don't want to give it all away, but at the very end of the documentary, we are talking specifically to potential victims who could be in a either exploitive relationship or human trafficking. Either way, a survivor that we interviewed in this documentary really talks to you on a one-on-one level of why we should care about this issue.
One of the things that I think is the most shocking takeaway from your documentary is really just how this is happening, not just in the big cities. Like you said, it is very local. There's a lot of people that probably watched it for the first time and had no idea the types of things that are going on here. Now that you know this, and you've known for a while because of your job, you've done special trainings. Tell us about some of those things that really kind of opened your eyes to what's going on.
Oh boy. So the Lampstand was gracious enough to send me to Houston, Texas to get certified as a human trafficking trainer. And when I took that trip, Houston is actually a high area for human trafficking. And when I was at this training, I was really blown away at just how simple human trafficking happens. So for instance, we think that all human trafficking victims are girls who look like prostitutes and girls of color. Typically, you'll see in the movies, Hispanic girls that look like me, mixed girls, Black girls, Asian girls. And I realized that was just a stereotype, especially on a local level. And one thing that I started to notice in the trainings once I came back to Roanoke and we were actually giving these trainings to everyday people, the number one thing they would say when I would say, what do you think human trafficking is? They would say kidnapping, international, transportation, shipping. And it was like, well, those things can happen, but it's a small percentage of what we see on a local level. And that really, I think, was a catalyst into why this human trafficking documentary needed to be done. Here you have local people that I see on a daily basis through the Lampstand who think it's one thing and it's not. And they're blown away when we give them this training of what it actually looks like. So again, I was like, we've got to get this out to the masses. How do we tell thousands of people? How do we train thousands of people? And the answer was television. We got to get it out on WDBJ7.
One of the things that you said that stuck with me is once you received these trainings and you started to become more informed, you would see things in your everyday life. And that's the thing, is so many people are probably missing the signs because they don't know what to look for.
I'll be honest, Chloe, as much as I hate to admit this, 2 years ago, I do a series, Hometown Veterans Honoring Our Heroes, and one of the stories in that series was nominated for an Emmy. So, got my dress, got all ready to go, and got to DC and didn't win the Emmy, but that's okay. We were leaving the ceremony, and my husband was with me, and we stopped at a grocery store. And he was going to go in and grab something, and I was waiting in the car. And the moment we pulled in, before we even parked, I saw something. It was two guys who appeared to be much older than the two girls they were with. And the two girls were probably 14 to 17 years old, not dressed provocatively, honestly. And they didn't look happy. They looked scared. And this was not a father-daughter relationship either. You could tell by the way they were holding the girls. And and this is, at this point, Chloe, I am totally trained on human trafficking. I'm working for the Lampstand.
Yeah.
I'm trained on how to spot this and what to do. And I choked. We parked the car, and immediately I began to envision what I was going to do. I was going to go inside the store, and I was going to follow them, and I was going to just see if I could see anything before I made the 911 call. And they got out of the car and they walked inside, and here comes my husband, and we get in the car and we left. And I never did anything. I never made the call. And to this day, I regret it. I think about those two girls, and what could have happened. And, best case scenario is it was nothing. Best case scenario was I called 911 and they showed up and did something and it was a false call. But I think sometimes we choke because we're so scared. We don't want to get someone in trouble, or we just don't know who to call. And in that case, I definitely should have called 911. But that was the moment when I got back to Roanoke and I couldn't stop thinking about those two girls that I decided, one, I was never going to let that happen again. And two, that I was going to train as many people as possible. And so that's when I approached the general manager here at WDBJ7, as well as my news director, shortly after. And I said, hey, can I have an hour? I want to do a human trafficking documentary. And they gave me 30 minutes, which I was, I was gracious for. After they saw Silent No More, they definitely want more. I think, it was eye-opening, but that was really a moment that changed my life. I all of a sudden had an urgency to tell this story because I had been making excuses for 2 years. I was like, I don't have time to do this. Like, I don't have time to do a documentary. But God laid out the vision in my head years ago, and I knew exactly how I was going to execute it. I had to be willing. And it was because of those two girls in DC that night that I did this.
That's amazing. I mean, this story's for them.
Yes.
And for so many other people.
Yes.
Girls, boys, children, even adults. I mean, there's no stereotype of who this affects.
No, and I think that's what's shocking too, is we typically think that the stereotype is girls, like I said, of color who look and dress provocatively, and that's just not the case. I mean, we know that data shows, and data is off because it's underreported, but we know that data shows that 39% of human trafficking cases are boys. But boys are less likely to come out about any kind of sexual abuse, whether it be a sign of weakness. There's this male masculine stereotype, or whatever the case may be, the fear of not being believed, or even shame and guilt. Boys tend to not come forward about these kinds of things. And we know that when women come forward, girls come forward, they're typically blamed for what has happened. Or, think about your average rape case. Well, what were you wearing? How much did you have to drink? And this is what really stops victims from coming forward, is those types of things. So this was really a documentary to kind of debunk all of the stereotypes, to call them out, shed light on this dark crime that's happening in plain sight, because people think that it's happening in these big cities, and they don't think, well, not my neighborhood. It's only in the ghetto. It's only in the bad part of town. And that's just not true. You can live in a mansion. You can have a perfect family that goes to church every Sunday, that is still married and does all the right things. And you have all the physical things that you could ever need. But one of those parents has never told you, I love you. That is a vulnerability. And a vulnerability is all a trafficker needs to do what they do. They meet the need, and then they exploit or traffic. And think about a need that we all have. We all have a need to be loved. Every one of us. Yeah. It doesn't matter where you're from or what you look like. And that is a huge vulnerability when it comes to how traffickers do what they do.
I want to go back to something that you said about, it was difficult. This idea was planted in your mind, but putting together a documentary, I mean, even though it came out amazing, it is no easy feat. I want to have you kind of explain to people what goes into that. And one thing that I thought as a fellow journalist must be so tough is kind of just as you're doing these interviews, as you're learning more information from authorities, victims, how do you carry that burden over the months and months and months it takes to put this together? Because it's, for people at home, they're watching 30 minutes and it's a tough 30 minutes. But for you, it's been months of this.
Yeah, this documentary aired April 11th and I started the process in October. So it was many months of a labor of love. There were tears. There was anger, there was sadness, there was joy, there was burdens, but the execution was far from easy. I think one of the things was I had this story in my heart. I had this story, I knew what I wanted to do, but how was I going to tell it through video. And that's difficult to tell. Human trafficking is hard to show.
Yeah.
Right? It's very difficult to show. So I had to get really creative. And that was hard. I think I knew from the jump that I wanted to be the videographer for this. I knew exactly who I wanted to interview. And I knew that I wanted to write and edit this. I wanted full control of it. So when I went to the higher ups about it, I said, you got to give me full control of this, because it felt like my baby, But it was difficult telling the story through video. But once the pieces came together, I think a lot of what we hear from survivors is when you see these documentaries, or movies, they're never told from victim perspectives. Yeah. They're never told from survivor perspectives. You always hear the perspective of like the law enforcement officer who rescued, and like no one actually rescues a survivor.
When you told me this blew my mind. Can you explain this to people?
Yeah, so we tend to love the savior rescuer mentality. Like we're going to come in and have a superwoman cape on and we're going to save people. And I think that that's a selfish way to look at why we should be helping people. It's actually not, it's not about us. It's not about rescuing anyone. I think, human trafficking is a lot like domestic violence. We know that victims will go back to their trafficker on average 7 times before actually leaving. Wow. And domestic violence is very similar. And people will say, well, why doesn't she just leave? It's not like they're forcing them to stay. And that's the same with human trafficking and domestic violence. It's a psychological hold. It's manipulation. It's coercion.
Right.
It's stronger than physically kidnapping them. That's hard for us to swallow because it's like even with the work at the lampstand, we don't claim to rescue anyone. The survivor has to be ready. I mean, think about addiction. You can put someone in a drug treatment program thousands of times, but they have to be ready. And I think it's the same with survivors of human trafficking, victims of human trafficking. They have to be ready. Some don't recognize as victims.
There's a part that they play in that process.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where we go wrong. We need to give the power back to the survivor. You did this. Like you left because you took the first step. It wasn't us. Right. And I think that's what the lampstand really tries to do is we're giving the power. We're empowering the survivor. You took the step to leave. You were brave enough to leave despite being threatened and fear of the unknown and worry of what could happen to you or your family or your children or your job or your future. You were brave enough to leave. And so that was really a huge, I think, thing that we took away from this documentary was hearing from the survivor instead of everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, the other interviews were crucial, but we need to hear from the survivor. So in this doc, we had a survivor. We had Bedford County Internet Crimes Against Children that, does exactly that. They're covering Southern Virginia, and I think they had almost 8,000 cases within 8 months in 2023. It's bad.
And I think one of the things I took away, too, that you made a point of in the documentary, even officials miss these things.
Yes.
Things get swept under the rug, and there's so many different types of trafficking that it's easy to not know in some cases.
Yeah, I think law enforcement who are on the front lines, medical staff are on the front lines, and we know that, but we tend to think that it's just them, and it's really us. Everyday people, even stay-at-home moms, can be on the front lines because it's in your neighborhood, it's at your church, it's in your child's school, it's at the grocery store, it's everywhere. Labor trafficking, sex trafficking, or there's an intersection where both are happening at the same time. For instance, massage parlors or farms, things of that nature. But, I think that is really... when it comes to telling this story and executing it, we had to have the survivor perspective first and foremost. That had to be the loudest voice.
Yeah. And that's got to be hard to find, too, because it's such a sensitive topic.
Yes.
And I'm sure not everybody wants to share what they've been through because
Girl.
they've been through very difficult things.
Yeah, that's hard to share. But again, what bravery to take what happened to you, shed light on it to help other people and equip other people, educate other people, empower other people so that this doesn't keep happening to other girls and boys and women and men. Talking about the process too, Chloe, editing this. Once I sat down to edit this, I mean, I think I was here every weekend. I was, praise God for my husband, who is very understanding because I also have 2 small children, but he knows my passion for this and was very supportive and just, I mean, all the way supported me to do this and encouraged me on days I wanted to give up.
Yeah.
But in the editing process, there were times that I was sitting at my desk for 8 hours listening to the audio clips, getting what I wanted, sifting through video and things and sifting through very dark stories. And I would look at the clock and 8 hours had gone by. And I would say, okay, you know, another hour or something. And then another day I'd get back in and I'd be on the editing system and I'd be editing and writing and all these things. And then I'd have tears just streaming down my face. And I didn't even realize I was sobbing.
Wow.
And so I would take my headphones off and say, okay, I need to step away.
Take a break. Yeah.
And I need to take a break. And 2 weeks before my deadline, the deadline was to have this done by April 1st.
I know it's coming next.
2 weeks, 3/4 of the video got deleted. And I remember crying. I was angry. And I was hopeful that night that it was going to be found. I came back the next day and it was like, it's gone.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do.
By the way, this is the worst thing that can happen to a journalist.
Oh, my word.
When you are, especially
I was devastated.
working on a project of that size.
I was devastated.
Yeah.
And I ended up going home, and I just remember feeling very defeated and discouraged, and I was ready to just give up. And I had every right to go into the boss's office and say, hey, nothing's been promoted at this point. I'm done. I'm not doing it. And I'll never forget what my husband said to me. He came up to me and he goes, this has been a fight from the jump. Did you really think this was going to be easy? And I remember sitting in the green room with you and I had this epiphany, and I want to share it with you because it was huge. I was saying to myself, all of the work I've put into this, all of the months of work that I've done, and it's just gone. And what a waste of time. And all of this, you know, these blood, sweat, and tears and time and all this editing and all this video that I've shot, and it's just all gone. And, you know, it quickly, Chloe, became about me. Mm-hmm. And it became about my efforts and what I was doing and me, and my.
Yeah.
And I felt, you know, I think it's pretty clear. Everybody knows, so I'm just going to say it. I am a firm believer in the Lord. And I felt the Lord clearly put on my heart that it was not about me. Did you do this for you, or are you doing this for them? Mm-hmm. And it hit me right then and there that I was being selfish. It wasn't about me, and it wasn't mine. Was I doing this for me, or was I doing this to help people? Was I doing this to spread education about human trafficking? Was I doing this to potentially equip people to save a life, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's when I got my mind right. And I realized that I needed to get refocused and that nothing was going to stop this project. Nothing was going to stop this documentary. I may have to delay it, but I'm not giving up. And my husband said to me, did you think this was going to be easy?
No.
And so I put my big girl boots on and came back into work, and I was ready to go. And praise, it aired on the air date, April 11th, with no delay. But it was weird because I found things and changes that I don't think I would have found before.
Yeah. It
So
gives
it was
you
like
another level of appreciation for it too. I bet.
Seriously. It was intense. It was intense. But I learned a lesson. When we do, as journalists, when we do stories to impact people, it should never be about us. And it should never be about well, look what I did, or what award will this win, or it should be about helping people. Mm-hmm. So I was thankful for the lesson. It was difficult, but I was thankful for the lesson.
And one thing that I think is great about this topic too, this is not a closed chapter. This is very much an ongoing problem, and I think your documentary is a great start to shedding light on it, especially for people like myself and so many others that aren't trained on these things and don't know a ton about it. But it's something that we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. I think with a 30-minute documentary, you factor in commercials, and this is kind of a behind the scenes that most people don't know. We have commercials and sponsors and things of that nature. So at the end of it, you have 18 to 20 minutes to tell your story in a 30-minute documentary. Yeah. And so that really was not enough time. So we just grazed the surface here with human trafficking. We didn't really get to go into labor trafficking. We did not really get to go into massage parlors or nail salons. We did not get to go into pornography and how pornography and human trafficking are linked. We did not get to go on victim blaming. We did not get to go into victim services and resources on a local level. Mm-hmm. So there's so much, Chloe, that's left to be said. We didn't even get to talk really about sextortion or exploitation.
And that's a big thing that's happening with social media right now.
Yeah, so I think there will be a part 2. There will be hopefully another hour to this where we'll get to dive in a little bit deeper with Silent No More and train more people. I think human trafficking is constantly changing in how they do what they do. So we should be constantly educating ourselves. Yeah. And it was eye-opening too doing this documentary. I had Patrick Rawls. Shout out to Patrick Rawls, who is actually in Florida, but he was a crucial visionary for this documentary. He did all the smoke graphics that you saw, and really was just, I could text him and he's like, I got it. But even just the graphics for like the names that I had to put together and the music that I had to find, and
especially just with such a sensitive topic. I mean, we're not talking about a fun little feature that we're putting together here. This is something that it impacts so many people's lives, and you want it to be sensitive to them, obviously. Yeah,
I think we need to, when we also tell stories as journalists, we're so quick to get the story and we want to be first, and we want it, we're impatient. Yeah. Right? And I think with this, I've been trained on being trauma informed. And I think that's important when telling stories of survivors. I would challenge all journalists to get trained in human trafficking. And with that training, find a training that's trauma informed, because I think it really helps me tell the story to be sensitive to those who might be watching. For instance, we put trigger warnings in this documentary for those who may have experienced sexual abuse or anything like that. That was important that we did that. Yeah. But also that we didn't show images that further pushed the stereotypes. We were very careful and trauma informed in telling this story. And I would challenge every journalist to be trauma informed, especially with survivors of abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, human trafficking. Trauma informed is crucial.
I remember even just after watching Silent No More, I thought to myself, okay, every journalist, every teacher, anybody really working in a public space needs to watch this documentary.
Thank
because
you, Chloe.
It's eye-opening, it's educational. Before we wrap up, I just want one question from you, because you came into this, you're not coming in not knowing much. This is a topic you know a lot about. You work in this field. But was there anything that even surprised you that you learned throughout this story, or something that just even shocked you?
Oh, boy. I think what shocked me the most, well, one, I learned a little more about a case that we reported on years ago in 2019. As I was digging more into that story, I came across some details from court documents of a 2-year-old child that ended up passing due to his sexual abuse. They were videoing him and putting these images on child pornography websites. And I think reading more about what actually happened to him was really eye-opening. And I think that that's what really hit me, that how can I be so selfish to think, wow, all my videos lost. Wow, look at all of this time and wasted time that I've had to go through. It's like, well, what about him who didn't have a voice, you know? What about all of the victims and survivors out there who don't have a voice? And how dare I complain about what I missed out on, you know? So I think this really revealed a nasty part of my heart. And I also think it showed me just like there are children who are going through this right now as we speak and have no outlet to come forward. There are boys and girls right now who are in this and they're literally living in bondage and don't feel like they have a way out. And I think that was the most sobering reminder for me because I do see it all the time. It's part of my work.
Right.
But let's not become numb. I mean, you know how that goes, Chloe, in news, working in news, you do violence all the time and kidnappings and murder. And sometimes I think as journalists, we become numb
for sure
to those things. And I think it's important that we don't.
And I think that's one of our duties as journalists is to be a voice for the voiceless. And what a perfect opportunity with this story. I mean, it's the definition of that.
100%. A voice for the voiceless is so true. Like, it's not about us and the great work we do. I want it to be deeper than that.
Melissa, I think that was great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me
on The Process. And if you didn't get to watch her documentary, we will link it below here on YouTube.